Well, Martin, so happy to be here with you. Just by way of introduction, this is Matt Orozco from Macabre Daily. And I am so happy to have this conversation with you because you are one third of the trio Blitz Berlin, which has been behind some of I'd say, some of the best genre films to come out in the past 10 years, particularly some of the ones coming out of Canada. Especially your work with Stephen Kostansky. You've done composers for compositions for The Void, Psycho Gorman, Brooklyn 45. But this year, you three have been really busy. You've done scores for Sweetness, Deathstalker, which is a personal favorite. I'll get to that in a bit. Queens of the Dead, Blue Heron, and then of course we're here to talk about Silent Night, Deadly Night. So, Martin, are you sleeping?
Yeah, man. Hey, this is one time when it really helps being in a trio because there's moments this year where there have just been multiple things due on the same date that are sonically totally different. And I can't imagine. I know a lot of composers are just sole proprietors, and I've never been able to figure out how that would work. I guess they would have to say no to stuff sometimes, which we seemingly don't. Uh, but yeah, this year was very intense, and we are just now entering a period of time for the first time basically since like April that we can like take a weekend and breathe. So you've caught me at the right time. This feels very good.
Good. Well, I hope you get to enjoy your weekend and do whatever you choose with it, because I can imagine just with all of the work you've been doing, and it's not just the work, it's really, really good work. I cannot say enough how much the what you did with the Death Stalker, what you three did with the Death Stalker theme, and how you layered that in throughout the rest of that score is just so wonderful. And I know Stephen, when I spoke with him a couple months ago, was singing your praises about the work as well. But when if you could give myself and others like a bit of a brief history of Blitz Berlin, because you've been doing this since I think 2014, something around there. So how did you three start working together? And just a quick oral history, if you will.
Sure, man, absolutely. I mean, around that time is sort of when we started our film composing stuff. But myself and Dean and Tristan started our first band together in high school, long, long before that, and played together in a punk band for many, many years. So
Hell yeah.
that yeah, that was sleeping on floors, playing little bars, that sort of stuff. That was in the winter in Canada, which there's
Oof.
it builds character. Let's say that.
It's a nice way of
Also
putting it.
it'll either completely detonate your friendship or it will forge lifelong friendships, which we're fortunate enough to have the latter. So yeah, I mean, our trajectory was from a small town in Canada, playing in a punk band, getting a record deal in Toronto and moving out there, and then doing some bigger tours and stuff. But the band also kind of falling apart at that time in terms of its like more traditional form. And that's right when we started to make music for film and TV with some directors that we were friends with who got their first bit of music or first bit of money to make their movies. Um, and that was honestly something that we didn't know was a career that guys like us could have coming from such a non-traditional background. We didn't have any training in, conducting or composing for an orchestra or something like that. So it was really exciting to be able to take a swing at that kind of world and figure out things from base principles in a way that is almost definitely wrong. you know, this is not the way you're supposed to do this thing, but this is the only way we could figure out in a pinch. And I think the sort of accidental part of that was maybe a bit of a blessing is I think our stuff just sounded kind of very unique because we didn't know the right way to do it. So the great thing about genre film and somebody like Steve Kostansky and working on those movies is they all have this really handmade quality to them where it's all
Yeah.
about experimenting and surprising each other and taking big swings, which is something that was has been very freeing for us. And we first met Steve shortly after moving to Toronto. Actually, met him in a dog park, which is how which is so random. Our drummer, my co-composer Tristan, was adopting a dog at the time. So was Steve. They were sitting next to each other, struck up a conversation, and Steve was in the edit on The Void at that point. Um, and they were having some trouble with certain cues and music stuff they were trying to move around, and gave us a shot. And then we've been lucky enough to kind of be his guys ever since. So that's
I
yeah, that's the
mean,
long short of it. That makes it sound more linear than it was. It was much more chaotic, but that's
oh, I'm
more or less how
sure.
it.
That's it's not
Yeah,
the behind the music version of it, but it is kind of the the cliff notes. And I do I think you did hit on something really interesting, which is that sometimes not knowing what you're doing actually leads you to what you end up like ends you leading you to what you do.
for sure.
And I think that Void soundtrack, I mean, I have it back here on vinyl, and it's so good, and it still holds up. And I think there's a timelessness to kind of almost this, you're almost like Tangerine Dream for the modern era in the sense that you're doing all of these great genre films. You're layering in this really interesting synth heavy soundtrack, but it's also not beholden to just one style.
Mm.
And I think of folks like we have interesting composers like Rob and Barry McCreary who are kind of all doing variations of this. But the one thing that I kind of always find most interesting is that I see yours all names pop up. I was at the Queens of the Dead showing a few weeks ago in New York,
Cool.
and I saw Blitz Berlin. I'm like, oh my God, you guys are everywhere. So, when it comes to this process and working with these creatives, how does that start with them? Is it something where you work kind of pick their brains a little bit to kind of get a sense of what they're going for? Do they more implicitly trust you? What does that kind of shorthand working together start and look like?
Yeah, I mean it's different with every director, but the way that we approach this, and I think something that maybe playing in a band for as long as we did has kind of prepared us for in a nice way, is like all band music, at least the way we made it, was deeply collaborative. There's no one songwriter and everybody else is playing that person's songs. Everybody writes together, everybody gets a say. It's kind of a best idea wins situation, but also there's a lot of, mutual respect and trying to get each other pumped up about stuff. When we work on a film, and when we work with a director, we typically see them as just a fourth member of the band who kind of comes in from a leadership perspective, knowing their film better than anybody could, knowing their characters and their story and their themes, and provides some leadership and direction that way. And ideally, make them feel very involved in the making of the score as well. And different directors want different amounts of that. Steve, for example, does a wonderful job of having a very clear vision, but also really letting us play. So he'll give us movies to watch or scores to listen um, to get us kind of in the right pocket and knowing what he's thinking, but then really just let us go to town and try to like surprise him with some ideas. So yeah, it can take that collaboration can take all different forms, but I think it's something that comes a little bit naturally to us because of how long we played as a band.
Yeah, especially in the punk world, right? It's like there is no like, front man really for punk groups, or there's no like one sole source, even like the Misfits, right? It's like you have Jerry Only probably wrote a lot of the music, but Danzig was doing the vocals. So I think I think that DIY element is kind of perhaps the secret sauce. It's like you kind of come with this punk background, you're bringing this punk rock approach to composing. Um, and when you think about the creative, differences that can occur, whether it's between yourselves or with filmmakers, how do you approach those and how do you work through them? Because I can imagine that it's not always kind of, yeah, this is great, or you all three are on the same page, wavelength all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of the reasons that we're very thankful for some of our long-term collaborations too, like with somebody like Steve, who we've made many movies together. I think we all have gotten to know each other in a way that it makes the review process and the notes process and the collaboration process a little smoother. But when working with a new collaborator, like on Silent Night, Deadly Night, we'd never worked with Mike before. Um, so a lot of it was figuring out each other's taste. And one of the things that he really brought to us was this desire for minimalism, which is different from a lot of the times with Steve's movies where we're going for broke. There's
Yeah.
more the merrier. They have to be big, epic undertakings. Whereas it was kind of fun because Mike's instincts are very much like, let's pull back, let's hear just that one sound, let's not clutter the space at all. Let's make the quiet parts really quiet and make people anxious because of how little we're giving them so that the big moments will sell in this certain way. Um, so yeah, I think that uh, you get notes from directors sometimes that you loved a piece of music and they'll come in and just be like, nope, miss,
Oh,
miss that one.
heart shattered.
It certainly does happen, but um, the way that we start on a film is by writing as much music as possible. And I think part of being lifelong collaborators with each other is you have to find this balance where you are uh, you totally love something that you're making, but you also hold in your mind that you might be really off base and have to throw it out. So it's
Yeah.
like it's double-edged sword that you gotta keep in mind. And we write so much music in the first place on a film that usually the review process, there's at least something that works. And especially when we're starting out before the movie has been shot, there's usually a handful of tracks the director will be like, I love these. These ones I don't know what's going on with. And we're like, okay, that's fine. You know, because a lot of it is experimenting and searching and finding that. So we try not to be too precious about that stuff. It's a rare thing where a little bit of pushback or a creative conversation will be necessary where we'll be like, I know why you're not feeling it, but I think it's really going to work and I believe in it for this reason. And part of the trust of collaborators, we've had directors be like, okay, let's try it.
Yeah.
So a lot of give and take. You have to take your ego out of it as much as you can.
I mean, I think something you said is so just a great life lesson, which is that we can spend so much time creating things that we put so much of ourself into. And, at the end of the day, we have to be okay with letting that thing go, whether it is a success or whether it's something that we hold on to for later or we just don't ever look at again. And I think what's fascinating about what you said about Silent Night Deadlight is I had the opportunity to see it back in September at Fantastic Fest. It was one of
Oh,
the
killer.
secret movies, and so I kind of almost understand what Mike was going for because the film itself is so over the top that you're
Mm,
like, okay, I don't know if I need necessarily the score to move things forward as much as I need it to be there to make sure that this anarchy has a bit of a undertone or an undercurrent of sound to go with it because it does get pretty outrageous. And I'm curious to know what your relationship is with the original film because it's, you know, some for I am I will admit I love the movie because of when I saw it in my life, the age I
sure.
was, and kind of the nostalgia that comes from it. But if I were to put on my objective critic hat, like it's not the world's best movie. It's got a few things going for it. But what's your kind of connection to that original film?
Yeah, I mean, the original film is something that is, as a cult classic, is something that we were, aware of as this, in very culturally significant kind of movie. But it came out, I guess it came out the year I was born, so it was not
Yeah, same.
not something I saw at the time, of course, or yeah, there you go, or was part of that initial outcry or any of that stuff. That was all legendary stuff later on. So I didn't see the movie till much, much later on. And yeah, I kind of thought of it as like, man, what a big swing, sort of, like they're really going for something here. And yeah, it was rough around the edges at times, but it had such a memorable feel to it. And so, in approaching the score for the new one, we wanted to make sure to like do justice to that and to pay homage to it in enough of a way while still doing our own thing with it. So it was it was a challenge at times to find the way to do that. What parts are we bringing forward from the original that really belong in Mike's version of this world, um, while still leaving lots of room to make this feel unique in its own way. Um, and I think you're totally bang on about the movie is so crazy that the music doesn't really have to be. And I think that was one of Mike's big drivers throughout is the place that the plot goes. There's so much that happens. We need the score and the characters to feel real and feel grounded so that these situations feel dangerous or feel exciting when they happen. Whereas if every part of the movie is elevated to this level of cinematic craziness, it's going to feel like the stakes aren't there as much. So giving the movie, aside from paying homage, aside from the Christmas feeling, aside from all that stuff, giving it an emotional core that felt minimal and felt honest was really important.
I think, that emotional core is something I was thinking about as you were talking, is that it is, in contrast to the original, it does have much more of a character arc for Billy that
Yes.
it is far more the through line of the film, whereas the original is very much a straight up slasher. This one is
Yes.
very much like the slasher is almost secondary to kind of what you're watching happen to Billy and who he is. And I think for me at least, it
Totally.
threw me for a huge loop because of what you come to expect from a Silent Night, Deadly Night film and what you're getting
Sure.
are uh, similar and familiar enough, but also different enough to be kind of interesting and unique. And was it when this is a seasonal film too, so kind of
Mm.
infusing that element of like the holiday season into this, is that something that was an interesting challenge for you all? Because again, most film scores, they're not, unless you are explicitly a holiday or a seasonal film, you're kind of more going for the tone of the genre so much as you are for the tone of the time. So how was it
Mm.
working in elements of the holiday season into the score, and was it hard or easy,
Yeah,
middle?
I mean, it was a lot of fun, and I think it was kind of surprising how easy it was to make Christmas music really creepy. It's like Christmas music itself, you hear it and you're like, oh yeah, the holiday, whatever. But like you change kind of one element, and all of a sudden it's like, oh God, like this, it sounds like haunted or something. You put something in a bit of a different key, or you have somebody singing a little out of pitch in that choir or whatever. It
Right.
can become basically any Christmas carol can become kind of disturbing kind of quickly, which is fun. Uh, and so much of the Christmas vibe in this film, as you know, having seen it, comes from a lot of needle drops in the film too. There's a lot
Sure.
of classic Christmas songs that come up, and the setting, the way everything is shot, like it all feels like it's hitting that mark of like we're in a Christmas movie. So what we identified with Mike early on was there has to be elements of that in the score, but the score's bigger job is going to be the emotion. It's going to be scaring people. It's going to be making them root for these characters in a way that they maybe didn't expect to, given the original sort of different take on this. And uh, if we can do that, then bringing in the Christmas elements is almost going to be the easy part. Like finding ways to bring in bits of jingle bells or bits of things that might not typically be in a horror score. But if what we're accomplishing is like emotionally right and is scaring people in the right way or making them excited in the right way, the other stuff ends up being a little bit more textural than it is sort of the core of it. Um, but yeah, we did a lot of weird jingle bell stuff. There are a lot of weird jingle bells.
I mean, but it's got, you are right though that like so many of these songs, if you just drop the vocals by like a couple octaves, it's a totally different kind of song, and it
Oh yeah,
sounds far more menacing, and it sounds far more antagonistic than how Christmas songs are supposed to sound. Moving aside that the lyrics sometimes are kind of a little bit questionable, the baby it's cold outside controversy still rears its holiday head. Um,
certainly.
but when you think about all the work you all do to kind of create these compositions and kind of put these, put the soul into some of these movies, right? Because the score really does act as this kind of propulsive element, and gives you a sense of how to feel about a film. How do you get
Mm,
inspired? Particularly in today's current musical landscape, when there's, I don't know, it feels like creatives are this one time thriving, but also semi under attack by the things like AI tools that are kind of trying to
mm.
replicate some of the uniqueness. So what do you do to get inspired and find new interesting sounds, or just retreat to things that you're comfortable with?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and that is something that is always a battle to stay to stay inspired, to find new and exciting tones and stuff. I feel like the answer is twofold for us. One of which is that we try to make records as often as possible. So not movie scores, not for film or TV or anything. Just make our own experimental music that's not really for anybody other than us and the handful of people that might seek it out. Um,
I listen to it when
and
I work, by the way. It's really good for that.
Hey, there we go. You're our number one fan.
I'm
Uh,
the Spotify guy.
it, yeah, hell yeah, that's great, man. It's music that we make. It comes from a different place, and it is we're not in service to a story or a certain tone or having to say something specific. It becomes a much more personal exploration, and ideally working our brains in a certain way that feels like a palate cleanser, so that by the time we're coming back into a film, we're not just coming from a bunch of other film references. We're coming from a place that feels a little more genuine to us in terms of the emotion that we're bringing to something. Um, but that, and we listen to just like a lot of not film music. Uh, Certainly aware of big scores and like love film music, sure. But the thing that really blew my mind recently is the new Rosalia record.
It's really
That
good.
thing, oh man, it just sounds like nothing else on the planet, and it any of the touchstones you were expecting from a Rosalia record just like aren't really there. It's like Vivaldi by way of Bjork or something. Like it's got like trap in there and super distorted clip drums and full orchestra and operatic singing and so many left turns. It's just all left turns, the whole record. So that to me, I was like, man, that is so fun that this exists in the world and is also like connecting with so many people and is a huge release, but there's no like radio song on that record, it all
Right.
feels uh it just feels like it's a lot of big swings. And so whether or not that's from film music or an artist like Rosalia or visual art or something, I always seek out things that feel fresh and challenging to me. That all kind of helps with that brain food and kind of staying fresh, I think.
Yeah, well, that you're right about that Rosalia record. It is insane. And
Yeah.
there's, I mean, it almost feels like pop by way of Apache, where like it's got this kind
Yeah.
of operatic vibe to it, but it also goes really deep into the electronic stuff. And I think that
100%.
surprise element is so much of what makes music, at least for me, interesting, right? Is that it's like you don't know always what you're going to get. There's always gonna be those old familiars, but with the ways in which kind of technology has democratized access to some of these tools, we're now getting people like, Fred again, who can go out there with pretty much just like a Ableton and a controller, and then all of a sudden we've got a full set going. But
Yeah.
as far as like the score, if you were all were given the opportunity to work on a film or do the score for a film, or redo the score for a film you love, is there any that you would absolutely love to touch, or maybe ones you're like, I would never want to touch it because it's just so good as it is?
Oh, geez. That is a good question. I feel like I have such a reverence for most of the movies and the films that I really love deeply that I grew up on. They're from all different, genres and whatever. And I think about some of my favorites to rewatch movies like older John Carpenter stuff, like I don't know, Big Trouble in Little China or something that has such an absurd, adventurous, zany kind of spirit to it. And I get that from like a modern context, you could look at scores from that era and critique them and think, oh, this could sound a little better or this could, be a little different that way. But I have trouble listening to music that way, to be honest. I don't often think when I hear something about how I could beat it or make it my own or do it differently. If that ever came to me, I would have to think that way. But I don't know, it feels like my church or something watching these things. I just feel like very much this reverence of being like, wow, like this my favorite scores, my favorite films, they feel like a magic trick. They're just like
Yeah.
all these elements are working in a way that is making me feel something that I can't put a name to. And so I try to learn from them more than I try to critique them too much, I suppose.
I mean, it's a very good way to go about it. And I do totally know what you mean that some of these, people can critique what they want, but at the end of the day, you can't, if you take some of the scores out of some of these films, they're just not the same. And it's like I can't imagine anyone else but Christopher Young doing Hellraiser. It just I can't imagine there's anybody else who could bring that kind of sound to that thing. And not to say there isn't, but I think you're right that some of these things kind of exist and should remain somewhat untouched because they preserve, what we love so much about them. But Martin, I could probably talk to you for forever. But I just want to say thank you so much for the time today and talking about not just your work on Silent Night, Deadly Night, but also so much of the work you've done for the genre. And I always look forward to seeing your all's names on the credits, because that means I'm getting, something that not only comes from a great place, but also sounds really, really good. So, best of luck on your time, just relaxing and hopefully decompressing from a very busy year, and a happy holidays to you as well.
I appreciate that, man. Thanks so much for having me on. This is great.
It's a pleasure, Martin. Thank you.